of Commons. He is literally centre stage in the great Brexit debate, and he does not suffer fools gladly.
Order! Order!
Order!
Everybody, including the Prime Minister, must comply.
Order! I say to the Chancellor of the Duchy that when he turns up at our children's school as a parent, he's a very well-behaved fellow. Spare us the theatrics. Behave yourself. Be a good boy, young man. Be a good boy.
We'll leave it there for now, and I hope there are no further points of order. There's an Arsenal match on television very soon.
He is neutral yet powerful, a Tory yet a Remainer, a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma, and he's here. Put your hands together for Mr. Speaker, John Bercow. Nice crowd, nice crowd. Good to see you.
Good to see you, thank you.
This is your first Irish interview, which is, it took you a while to get here, but we got there.
We got there in the end. My mother-in-law's maiden name was Eileen O'Reilly. You can't get much more Irish than that.
No, we'll take that. Have you had a nice welcome since you got here?
Warm, avuncular, friendly, welcoming, charming. I mean, what's not to like about coming to Dublin?
You're happy. Good, so far. Are you shocked by the reaction that your role as Speaker has received around the world?
I suppose shocked is one word for describing it. Taken aback.
Yes. Initially
perplexed. I'm not accustomed to thinking in those terms. And, of course, it's all, Ryan, because of Brexit. Because although there's quite an audience for Prime Minister's questions, to be sure, and 'twas ever thus, but a lot of the time, if we're debating exclusively British matters, you can't expect there to be huge interest across Europe or beyond. But because we have spent a completely disproportionate amount of time debating, focused on, obsessed with Brexit, there's a read across throughout Europe, and indeed, for that matter, beyond. So I know that before the withdrawal agreement was published last November, the previous month, I think I'm right in saying that something like 230,000 people watched parliamentary television.
Amazing.
By March, 4 months later, the figure was 1.75 million. And I think last month, at one point, it got to 2.75 million. So by a massively greater multiple, people have been tuning in, watching. They may not have been impressed, they might have been frustrated, angry, flummoxed, but they were certainly not disinterested or disengaged.
You play a role in that, because I would have been watching Parliament since it's been televised, which isn't that long, I suppose, a couple of decades or thereabouts, and no one says the word order like you, John.
Order!
And there's several different types of it. Order. 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 And then there's order.
Order.
How do you decide on who gets... Like, if it's somebody being irrational, stupid and puerile, they get a...
Order.
If it's somebody who is showing off, being pompous and really annoying you, they get...
Order.
If it's somebody you find very impressive and yet it's just going over time, but you actually rather admire...
Order.
So you have this. What's your cat's name at home?
Order.
Is that true?
Yes, our cat's name is Order, because when we moved into Speaker's house... we were, I think it's fair to say, a bit spooked in the early weeks by the fact that there was an infestation of mice. Now, why was there an infestation of mice? Speaker's house is part of Parliament. Parliament's an incredibly old building, and it's very close to the river. And so the family moved into this Grace and Favour apartment, Ryan, and it was spacious, albeit not designed by us or to our taste, but it was very spacious and a great privilege. But we were completely taken aback by the fact that there were, I think on the third night, something like 15 mice scurrying around the flat. And that wasn't to put it mildly, very agreeable. So anyway, my wife said, well, we're going to have to sort this, so we must get a cat.
Yes.
And she was on Twitter at the time, and she said, well, honey, I think we should have our cat named by Twitter poll. So she asked people, well, what do you recommend? You know, what name do you want? And some people suggested Hansard, which is the name of the official report, the verbatim record of parliamentary exchanges. And far more people said order. So the word order is heard regularly in our private apartment in Speaker's House, but it's not me talking to the kids, it's one or other member of the family talking to our cat.
But nevertheless, I suppose if you see the cat coming in and trailing a mouse with blood entrails, you would shout at it.
Well, I would probably say, well done, order.
Order, yeah, it's a popular order. Let me talk about more serious matters for a moment, which is the little dazed lapsing on our TV screens in the corners in towards Brexit. How do you think it's all going to play out or end, or into what direction can you say? What do you think?
I think anybody who says with complete confidence or even much conviction, I know what's going to happen, is either an extraordinarily clever person or a raging fool. Because it's all so unpredictable, the vicissitudes of fortune.
Yes.
One day to the next it changes. There are terrible periods of pessimism, and then all of a sudden people are upbeat and they say that there's going to be a deal. I don't know whether there will be or not. I suppose all I can say is it seems to me, Ryan, there are three legitimate outcomes.
OK.
One, that there is an approved Brexit deal. Approved by Parliament, and we leave by the 31st of October or by some other specified date.
Sure.
A second is that Parliament approves, I can't see this happening, leaving without a deal. I make that point because I think that the idea of just crashing out without parliamentary authority is intolerable, and that was the route to, or the rationale for, the passage of the so-called Benn Act, which basically says we won't come out on the 31st of October without a deal unless Parliament has explicitly approved that.
Sure.
And the third possibility is that there's no approved deal and no approval for leaving without a deal, and the Prime Minister has to ask for an extension. And that is what the law currently says must happen. That is what it explicitly stipulates if there isn't an agreement or an agreement to leave without an agreement. And everybody has to obey the law because of that old English principle, be you ever so high, the law is above you. And I'm sure that point is not lost on anyone, including very senior ministers.
Indeed. And when you look across the Irish Sea as a punter, as opposed to the Speaker of the House, do you think that the current government understands Ireland?
I think that the government is very much focused on its policy priority, and its policy priority is the delivery of Brexit. It may be that some ministers understand Ireland better than others. I see myself, frankly, as a European. I mentioned that on my wife's side there is notable Irish heritage.
Yes.
My father was of Romanian origin. His parents came over on the Onion boat facing persecution. I discovered my Europeanism pretty late in my political career, but better late than never, or even late than never.
Nice.
And to me, the peace that has been established in Ireland is absolutely precious.
Yes.
But it might be fragile, and nothing on earth should be allowed to threaten or impede the continuation of that peace. What was achieved by John Major, Bertie Ahern, Tony Blair, the Good Friday Agreement, is one of the most remarkable accomplishments of statesmanship.
There's just a sense that the men you've mentioned...
You can't lose that.
Yes,
you cannot risk losing that. And the idea of going back to some sort of hard border and the divisions, the rancour, the threats, the intimidation, the violence, the death, the slaughter of the past is, I think, unimaginable to anybody who contemplates it for a moment and has a conscience.
It's just that you mentioned Tony Blair and John Major, and they just strike me, you know, as a student of Irish history, we all are, I think, in this country, men who had better insight into the island than current office holders.
Well, I don't want to
You probably can't,
ruminate
but- yes.
or pontificate about current office holders.
Yes.
Suffice to say,
Okay.
I think at that time, let's put it like this, there was a very deep sensitivity to how horrific the outrages
Sure.
had been and how important it was to put in place the architecture of peace. Having put it in place, it's got to be preserved. And the idea that anybody might say, oh, well, the agreement's no longer needed, or it doesn't apply, or it's a relic of the past and we've moved on. Well, insofar as we've moved on from the decades of violence, it's because there is a machinery
Yes.
for achieving and sustaining peace, and we can't have anything that threatens that. So what Ireland thinks, what Ireland wants, is very important. It's not the owner factor, but it is very important.
Wasn't John Major the son of a circus performer? Is that correct? Am I right in saying that?
I think that's right.
Right. And wasn't Margaret Thatcher the daughter of a grocer?
She certainly
Right.
was.
I say. So you met her, did you?
I met her actually in 1979. I was at school in Finchley.
Yes. Was that her
and
constituency?
It was her constituency, and in her last appearance in the constituency before the May 79 general election, she went and spoke at a local school, not my school.
Yes.
I didn't take it personally.
But you went to meet her?
But I went to hear her, and I must have been quite pushy because I inveigled my way to the front of the hall and I met her at the end. And I said, probably in a rather oleaginous way, well, I've greatly enjoyed your speech, Mrs. Thatcher. And she said to me, Mr. Bercow, are you a member of the Young Conservatives? And I said, well, I'm afraid I'm not, Mrs. Thatcher, but I have come to hear you and I've been greatly inspired. And she said, well, you most assuredly should be. And she told me where to go to join and so on. And
So
I
that
very
was-
much admired her at the time, and I still admire some of her great qualities, but she's in no way a heroine today to me as she was.
That's interesting
then.
because you've had quite the adventure politically in terms of being quite to the right and now much more almost a sweetheart to the left. But we won't talk about that just now because I wanted to ask you about your father was a taxi driver. Is that right?
A minicab driver.
A minicab driver, and yet. You joined the Tory party. Some people might say, minicab drivers might be a typical Labour sort of vote, but not the case. And you joined the Tory party and rose through the ranks to where you are today.
Well, he was a small business person in the first instance. He
Yes.
ran a car business. He was honest to goodness. He wasn't a good business person. He never made a great success of it. And when the business went downhill,
Yes.
at the time of the death of my uncle, who was his elder brother, that and ill health, or intermittent ill health, forced him to change course. And for the last 10 years of his working life, he worked as a minicab driver. But he'd always believed in free enterprise, self-reliance.
So that would tally with that
Toryism,
policy.
so to speak. And I was a Tory at that time. But you introduced me as a Tory. I am, of course, non-partisan.
I
haven't
apologise.
been a member of the Tory party since the 22nd of June 2009.
As soon as you go in. Now, let me ask you this. If you weren't the Speaker of the House of Commons, or at least if you hadn't gone into politics, would you have loved to have played against Pat Cash or one of the greats, Jimmy Connors probably, John McEnroe, Bjorn Borg? Was tennis the thing you would have loved to
Oh,
have
tennis
achieved?
was my first love.
Was that the big
and
one?
in fact, all of those people that you've mentioned
Yes.
were tennis greats, Pat Cash,
Yes.
Bjorn Borg, John McEnroe, Jimmy Connors, and a great many others. But my all-time sporting hero, the living icon of the game of tennis, is none other than Roger Federer.
Oh, well, of course.
And I would love to have been able to hit balls against Roger Federer, but I mean, I'm not quite sure in what century that would have been possible.
Yes. So why did you give up the ghost on the tennis?
I just wasn't good enough.
As simple as that.
I actually had a winter of bronchial asthma, which knocked me out, almost literally knocked me out, and so I didn't play for some months. I played competitively as a kid, but I was what you would call a determined hacker. That is to say, I was quite good at retrieving, and I could run forever, and I was as dogged
Yes.
as could be. I had a sort of an indomitable will.
You played tennis.
But I wasn't very talented.
You played tennis with Boris Johnson a couple of times.
Yes, I did play tennis with Boris.
And
Yes.
is he better at tennis than he is at politics?
No. No, we played 3 sets.
Yes.
Well,
How'd that go?
well, I did win them.
Good.
We played actually at a court at his country residence.
Yes.
And Boris was very sporting and very gracious and a very good host. But I had brought with me some decent balls that we could play our game with. It wasn't a great court, and there was quite a lot of moss on the court and at the side of the court. And there were hidden, in the undergrowth, if you will, some very, very, very old balls which had no fur on and which looked as though they probably hadn't been used to play a game of tennis for years. And what Boris would do from time to time in the course of our encounter was surreptitiously to take one of those balls, which was scarcely fit to play with, and to serve with it in the hope of catching me out. So it was a slightly cheeky ruse on his part.
Slippery, I'd say.
Well, you could say that.
You could.
I couldn't possibly comment.
No,
but
indeed.
The question is, was it successful? It was spectacularly unsuccessful.
Yes, as ruses go.
As ruses go.
OK, let me ask you, as we head towards Halloween, the most beautiful date in the calendar, which is Brexit Day, how long, I thought I heard you saying in the House of Commons that you were going to go that day, but is that date a movable feast in the event of things changing on the political calendar?
No, I don't think so. I said on the 9th of September,
that's
if Parliament voted that day by the requisite majority for an early election, I thought it only right to say to my colleagues that my tenure as Speaker and as MP would end when the Parliament ended. If, however, as transpired, Parliament didn't vote that day to trigger an early election, well, I intended to step down at the close of business on the 31st of October, and I stand by that.
OK. Would you like to be a caretaker Prime Minister in the event of a constitutional crisis?
No. And I don't expect for one moment that to happen. There's quite a lot of speculation about it. Well, I suppose it's because the government is facing a testing time. There's been a certain amount of commentary about who, if the government fell, could construct a government that commanded a majority. And because people have got all sorts of objections to particular individuals from one party or the other, the idea somehow sort of came to the surface, if you will. Oh, well, perhaps we should have a non-party figure. But am I anticipating that? No. All I would say is none of those options that I referred to is off the table. They are all there and, in a sense, centre stage. And I don't know which is going to prevail. But whatever happens, as far as I'm concerned, it is incredibly important that the UK has good, cordial, constructive, realistic relations with the whole of Europe. I mean, the people of Ireland know the value of engagement with Europe, and we mustn't just pull up the drawbridge and behave as though Europe is alien or Europe is an enemy. That is, frankly, juvenile and self-defeating.
There's some talk as well, and you can put this talk to bed when I ask you, would you enter the jungle in I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here?
Absolutely not, under any circumstances.
Any circumstances.
Under any circumstances.
Never going to happen.
I have not the slightest interest in taking part in that programme. I don't want to knock or cavil at or belittle anybody who chooses to do that programme, but it just doesn't interest me. I've got various ideas about things I'd like to do when I step down from the role of Speaker, but I have no interest in going on that programme, and I never suggested that I would, so nobody's got any basis for thinking that I might.
Would you accept a peerage if you were offered one?
Yes, if I were offered it.
Yes.
But am I sort of sitting awake at night, having sleepless nights, anxiously talking to myself or talking to Sally and saying, will it happen? No, I think that it has been the convention, but all sorts of conventions in recent times have
been thrown up in the air.
And you just have to wait to see how people choose to conduct themselves.
It's been great to talk to you, and continued success in the role for the few weeks you have left in it.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoy the rest of your time here in Ireland, and do come and see us another time when the dust settles.
If you let me.
We certainly will. John Bercow, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, John. That's incredible. Thank you. Thank you very much. Keep your seat for a moment. Yeah.